recently experienced something joyful. A few months ago, well, let's just say a season ago, I was invited by my neighbors to their house for a men's gathering. My neighbors are members of the Buddhist faith. I had mentioned to Gene and his wife, Almeida, that I was working on this website called Servants of the Most High God, and that I would like to interview them with regards to their faith, that I would like to gain a better understanding about their faith and their belief. Well, a few weeks later, they invited me to a men's gathering, a time dedicated to expressing their devotion and exchanging dialogue with one another. When I arrived at the door and entered the room, they all extended to me a heartfelt, warm greeting. I sat in a room with about 12 men, and I eagerly listened as they spoke about their faith and exchanged dialogue. They graciously allowed me to ask them a few questions regarding their faith, and Sidney Donaldson, one of the men present, was willing to do a one-on-one interview at a later date. I had a great time, a wonderful time, and I really enjoyed their company. And what I had experienced afterwards, when I left their presence, was real interesting. Later on that day, the Lord carried me away in spirit and stood me in an open field before a large tree, and he asked me, "What do you see?" I said, "A large tree, Lord, and it is full of branches, and its branches are full of leaves, and it looks to be well watered." Then he carried me away again to a faraway country, and he stood me once again before a tree, and he asked me again, "What do you see?" I see a tree, my Lord, and it looks like the first tree, but it's not the same tree. You are right, he said. Then the Lord proceeded and asked me these questions. Who planted this one? And could a man uproot a tree of this size and plant it in another country? I remember thinking, no, it's too big. And why would there be a need to? And then the Lord went up for me. Faith is God-based. And like God, faith is spiritual. Our personal experiences with faith and God have allowed for us to speak and testify about our beliefs. A belief that trees are planted and their roots watered by the powers given their rest in the invisible. Let's watch the video as we go down.
Let me turn this up so it will be on your sound. Bought a couple of these, save energy bills.
Is the audio meter, is it fluctuating as we're talking?
Okay. You were good? Okay. Do you want a stool to sit down in so you want to stand for? Let me get you a stool.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking out the time.
My pleasure.
We've been trying to put this together for a while now.
And you know what? I am so impressed that you're not holding it against me, man, because believe me, I had so many things on my plate.
Right, well, I understand that, and I just appreciate you taking out the time. That's really the thing. So it had to be at your pace, whenever you.
Well, you know what? I'm so glad that we got to it.
I am too. I am too. Now, I got a question for you. Actually, I presented you with several questions, so later on I'm going to go into details, and we're going to do a feature together with regards to drink coffee. Talk about God portion with my experience. So it's really wonderful for me. Okay, there are different facets of the Buddhist faith. What is the name of the particular faith which you practice, and why did you choose it?
Okay, there are different Buddhist sects.
Okay.
Okay, probably to be more specific. The sect of Buddhism that I practice, I started practicing because it was the only sect that I had encountered at the time that I started practicing. I just got out of Vietnam. And a friend of mine came over to my house and told me that he had went to a Buddhist discussion meeting. And Buddhism was something that kind of intrigued me, my thoughts, because I had just got out of the Army and did some studies in different world religions and the origins of their predominance, So I went to the discussion meeting, and the thing that impressed me was the universalism of the concepts behind Nichiren Buddhism.
Okay.
Based upon the perspective of the phenomenon of cause and effect, which made sense to me. I thought it was always, when I was a kid, I always wondered why people attributed what happened to people as random acts. And Buddhism had a perfect explanation of that made sense to me logically.
Well, what was the explanation?
Of the concept of karma. In other words, people experience what they experience based upon a particular cause that they may have generated, spanned over another fundamental principle of Buddhism, which is the eternity of life. In other words, an entity exists, and there is, the Buddhist concept is, when a person expires from this world, it's not as if they go to a specific place where they live in eternal bliss, but it is the concept of the transmigration of life. In other words, a cycle of lives and deaths, or what Buddhism attributes to the cycle of life and death, the eternity of life.
Now, how much examination did you give to the other sects?
None.
None.
I shouldn't say that. I had an opportunity to study some facets of earlier forms of Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, and basic. And then I had a professor in college that was in Zen Buddhism. The basic. My basic studies of them, alluded to a lot of different sects who deal with very esoteric forms of Buddhism, transmigration, Buddhism from the standpoint of, what do you call it, when a person, oh man, I'm trying to think of the name of this now, very etherical aspects of Buddhist practice that people practice in the 11th and 12th century, such as meditation, certain forms of martial arts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, I see.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Well, you answered the second question, was how did you become a Buddhist? You said it was, you had aspects that you began to examine and you had questions, and those questions drew you into your particular faith.
I had a lot of time on my hand when I was in the military, and one of the things that always intrigued me was world religions. So I had an opportunity to do some study on it, and it was very, very enlightening, as to how a lot of world religions even evolved. How
their origins,
exactly,
aspects
right,
of their origin.
Right, their beginnings, how they evolved into what they are currently in the world.
Now, have you noticed? Have you yourself witnessed a change in your faith? Has your faith changed from its initial origins? In other words, you talked about that there's different sects. Apparently there was one core element, and from this one core element, branches came.